Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening to my podcast. A few notes about the presentation. After years of scripted talks, many of them methodically outlined, some even memorized, at least in part, I decided to drop that style and simply speak spontaneously from my heart. So that's what I do. My talks are raw and improvisational. I make them up as I go along. In addition to my World Dharma talks, I also offer at times readings from my books, Instinct for Freedom, A Future to Believe in, The Voice of Hope, and Wisdom for the World. I also offer readings of my personal notes, sometimes guided meditations, dialogues from my World Dharma public forums, interviews from radio and television, and sections from my show, Spiritually Incorrect Meets Relationship Incorrect, The Great Reckoning, and the occasional conversation with someone I find interesting. I also want to express my deep gratitude to the people who have made donations to me, either a one-time or recurring donation, either on the support page of my website, alanclements.com, or pledged a monthly amount as little as $1, perhaps $3 or even $5 a month, through my Patreon site. If you're inspired to do so, you can support this podcast and my work by making a monthly pledge at Patreon. That's patreon.com, patreon.com/Alan Clements, and there you'll find my page. You can use a credit card or pay through PayPal, and your monthly pledge, that's what it takes, just a few minutes to set up, allows me not only to do my work, it allows me to create my art, use my voice, speak my Dharma, free of commercial consideration or advertisers. Thank you from my heart for taking the time to listen to my podcast, and thank you for your generous support. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Alan Clements. I've been doing what I call the World Dharma Public Forum. I think I mentioned to some of you I'm a bit of a recovering Buddhist. I am no longer formally a Buddhist as of the war in Bosnia when I was there for the year, primarily based in Croatia, just a short aside, in a tragic sacred moment. I saw what good human beings will do. Yoga teachers, meditation teachers, Buddhists, philosophers, sexologists, poets, Rumi devotees, politicians, psychiatrists, they'll kill in the name of their truth. It was a three-way genocide. In seeing the slaughter some months after the Srebrenica massacre, where 8,000 boys and girls were separated from their parents, and the boys and the fathers, 8,000 of them were massacred in 48 hours. You might remember that. Having been for a year in the country, primarily again in Zagreb, where I was based, writing a film, based upon where I'm staying here today in Santa Monica by my very dear friend, Robert Chardoff. He's passed away. Many of you might know of his work. He's most known for the Rocky movies, The Right Stuff, 43 movies. He came to a retreat of mine in 1985 up in Ojai, and over the course of several years, having attended my formal Buddhist meditation, mindfulness, Vipassana-based traditional teachings, we became deep allies. Came to India, took him to Burma. I eventually had the blessing to marry he and his wife. She's in Toronto for the summer. Asked, Alan, do you want to come back to your roots? And I'm here as a result of my dear friend Jenny Chardoff and my beloved dear friend Robert Chardoff, and Noah and your Sangha. Noah's correct. I reached out to him purely out of a devotion to knowing in my own personal life both accusations, false accusations, the tragedy of scapegoating. I'm not saying this is true for Noah, except that it really catalyzed something in my heart. Point one.
What's the catalyzation? As Noah mentioned, I've spent a good part of my adult life in the country of Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. I was a Buddhist monk there. I lived in Venice Beach in 1976, 77, where I was the most consummate, skilled professional addict you could ever imagine. Loved it. Loved it. I wish I could go back there and do it again. I was juggling so many addictions simultaneously. It was just hilarious to see the tragedy of my life, except that I was, blossoming unknowingly at that time. As a result of my need for survival, I returned to my roots based upon his father. Noah's father was my original connection to Buddhism. Not unlike a lot of people at that time. 1972, consummate yogi, a silent day a week, vegan in 72, unheard of. A long-time relationship with my beloved dear friend Catherine Ingram, very prominent teacher today and journalist, and a meditator at that time, and yet deeply unsatisfied, even with my microdosing and heavy dosing of LSD at the time, to illuminate the structures of inner being as it configured with this strange, terrifying mystery of life. And all I could see was this incessant, I know you know, this incessant dissolving, this decay of phenomena. It was no place, it was a castle of sand. We couldn't grab it. We couldn't live it. Even an eternal kiss of making love was so fraught with anicca, temporariness, that all we could see was the disillusionment of everything. And so in a moment of despair, I went to a bookstore, and there I encountered this phenomenal act of grace by Stephen, Unity Press. I looked at this book, Mindfulness Meditation Exercises, opened it up, and it was like no one would actually know that it would speak to you so intimately. It was just so clear and direct. No frills, no romance. And I was so turned on to the systematic role of the power of meditation and mindfulness and Vipassana, insight meditation, and classical Buddhist made experientially real, no heavy-duty indoctrination and beliefs, if you know what I mean. And I said, who knows how to teach this method? And of course, it led me to Naropa Institute in 1974. Shogrim Trungpa Rinpoche, the Tibetan, had various people who came out of India and South Asia who had a little bit of a modicum of background in Buddhism and meditation. I encountered some of these teachings there. It led me quickly into Mahasi Sayadaw's domain. We went to India. My partner and I went overland, and I primarily ended up in Burma with a number of people that you know, very prominent people, so to speak, in the Buddhist teachings in the West. And Ram Dass was there, Jack Kornfield was there, Joseph Goldstein was there, Sharon Salzberg was there, Mark Epstein was there, Stephen Smith was there, Catherine Ingram was there, Jamie Barres was there. And there I wanted to become a monk for one reason. I was so fucking done with escaping, absconding from my integrity. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't do another line of coke. I couldn't do any more morphine. I couldn't do another fucking pill. I couldn't drink another shot of whiskey. I couldn't masturbate another moment. I could not. And yet I wanted to. The only teaching that made sense was be mindful of your mind. Thoughts come, notice them. Feelings come, notice them. You know what I mean? You've been there. Mahasi Sayadaw was a teacher of great renown. He was the modern-day father of the Vipassana mindfulness movement. He brought out of the forest traditions in Burma these ancient teachings of present-time presence, of looking at your mind and seeing it for what it is. Out of the monastic setting, he brought it, based upon the Prime Minister of UNU, maybe you know this, to a small little center in Rangoon, the capital of Burma at the time, where 15 people, far more here tonight, 15 people sat with this prominent monk, and he proceeded to teach them the basics of what Noah's father produced in the book, pretty much a verbatim Dharma talk that I was now hearing from this particular monk in person. And it was like coming home. I know you hear that so often in life, right? You meet your twin flame, your soul, you're coming home to something so pure and sacred. But the Dhamma, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, you've heard that. I take refuge in the Buddha, the awakening. Dhammang Saranang, I take refuge in the principles of awakening. It's a knowable, discernible teaching. It was like I didn't have to believe anyone. He said, just point your presence that's innate in you to your own mind, and there you will come to know the nature of that mind. I wept with joy because I didn't have to do another fucking line of cocaine in Venice Beach and paint another picture of my despair. I was so good at painting pictures of my despair. I had almost no hope left in me. I would have been in jail or imprisoned or committed suicide if I'd lasted one more fucking month. If it wasn't for that, be aware of your mind as it arises. It's simple teaching. You have a choice. Now, most of you, I don't know. I don't want to assume anything here. Maybe you know what it's been like to be consumed by things. Shopping, sex, masturbation, denial, running, preoccupation, blame. They're always the reason why I didn't do it right. They're the ones that created the world that I don't really have. And it's the society, it's culture, it's alcohol, it's sex, it's them. The cacophony of blame was so sickening to me in my mind. And I just sat there and just looked, and I said, sir, I want to fucking do this until I become really skilled at it. He said, you can't stay here. It's a dictatorship. I didn't know how to spell the word. It was a 7-day visa. You could only stay for a week in Burma at that time. I wept in my own heart. He said, go to this monastery in Sri Lanka, jump time. I did it, but it wasn't with the teacher. I had some kind of karmic, deep, indelibly placed bond to want to be with this gentleman. He was like the Oxford guru of mindfulness. He wanted no money. He wanted no applause. He wanted nothing from me than to help me overcome my addiction from the number one best kept secret in my life was me. I kept running and running away from me. And meditation became the symbolism, the analogy, the metaphor, the sacred throne of me finally calling off the search and facing me. Not with blame, not with spin, not with criticism. Yes, they're all there, right? But just feel it, see it, know it. Feel it, see it, know it. Keep feeling, courageously feel it, see it, know it. Well, I came back to Venice Beach. It was the second great coming of my darkness. I was in such despair now, not feeling any placement in society. I didn't want to be an artist. I didn't want to be a consumer. I didn't want to fucking masturbate. I didn't want to make love. I didn't want to eroticize. I didn't want to do drugs, but I did them all. And inside of that, there was a quiet, over-roaring conscience. Alan, you've got to go back to the meditative path, not Buddhism. And so we had the good notion. I have to say I was one of them. If we can't go to Burma because of dictatorship, bear with me. We'll open it up soon to some questions. Let's bring these monks in Mahasi Sayadaw to America, 1978. Wrote a letter to them. They accepted. Yucca Valley, rented it. Organized the retreat. Managed it and cooked it. Attended to Mahasi Sayadaw as a layperson and brought in 150 people so that I could sit with him. How greedy is that? 77, 78, I'm not sure exactly. Then we did another retreat on the East Coast, at that point with friends of mine, Joseph and Sharon and Jack, at the Insight Meditation Society. I was one of the early people there as well. All contemporaries, all allies at that time. Good people. And at the end of that, we're in New York, and I said, I cannot do this again. I went in the bathroom, did a couple of lines of coke, and I said, sir, I'd like to ordain as a monk or I'm going to die. I literally said that, I'm going to die. I was going to die. He said, okay, You can come with us. Well, he says, but you have to ask your mom and dad for permission. I flew down to Virginia, where my parents lived. I says, Mom and Dad, guess what I'm doing? I'm ordaining as a monk. Go forth, young man. Save your ass from cocaine. And I ordained and shaved my head, and the next day flew back to England and Thailand, and eventually on a prop plane at 68 years old today, I was just 27 at the time, flew into Rangoon, and 250,000 people with candlelights and were there greeting Mahasi Sayadaw. I had never known what this was like. It was like the Red Sea was parting. And I'm in the car with this gentleman, go to the monastery. He says, you've got 7 days to practice intensively in this monastery. Look at me, young man. Many people in my country never have 7 days their whole life to be in silence. Don't think it's short. But all you get is a 7-day visa, and we'll do what we can to extend the visa. But remember, we're petitioning a dictator. These are paraphrased words. And it's unprecedented to give anyone other than diplomats extensions. You've got 6 days to be in silence. I don't want to make a big point of how easy it is to project time in our lives. But if I've learned anything about the Dharma and meditation, it's not just sitting. It's the power of immediacy. I love people that show up. Unpredictably real. You know what I'm saying? I know you and you know me, but we've never met other than just briefly. But are you going to make this the most important moment of your life? Yes, play high stakes. I've had 9 dear people die in my life in the last 3 years and the loss of a beautiful relationship. Tragically, seeing my friend Aung San Suu Kyi and colleague and author of a book that we did together, The Voice of Hope, vilified by the international press. What's happened to Noah is insignificant on some emotional level to how she's been thrown under the bus even by the people who've criticized this gentleman without even speaking to her, believing fake news. I'm so down with knowing, hey, listen, check it out. Go to the core, ask questions, investigate. Doesn't the Dharma mean that? What else does meditation mean other than radical, courageous inquiry beyond the feeling of trust? Look again. Self-deception is very insidious, isn't it? Hypocrisy is even more at the core of deception. Who among us has not failed our ethics? Aung San Suu Kyi, a student of one of my teachers who had inherited the tradition from Mahasi, Sayadaw U Pandita. We've been friends for years. They have a national policy of not vilifying even those who've tortured you. Think of that. It's not just a policy of reconciliation, but non-demonization. If anything in your life, Alan, means something to you, see a difference between the behavior and the person. Point to the behavior and reveal in yourself how what you see in the other, you too have failed. Show by example. I'm pointing out, I'm calling you out, gentlemen. You know why? Because I'm calling myself out. I've been a hypocrite. I've been a liar. I've deceived. I've reviled. I've lied. And this is how I've done it. Show by example. It's not just reconciling differences in that country. When I was learning meditation, it was the high art of owning even that behind that. And if you didn't have access, we were taught in our training, to self-deception, hypocrisy, projection, and blame, you had no chance of going deeper in the meditation. You had to have a mindfully intelligent relationship to those insidious forces halfway through. Well, I practiced ardently. It was tough. I was coming down off coke and morphine and pharmaceuticals and alcohol and running. And you think you look bad with hair? Cut your hair, wear these orange curtains, and I'll tell you, you really fucking look ugly. Now, mind you, I had 300 scars on my head, or stitches on my head from a car accident. And so when you shave it, you really look bad. So you don't look in mirrors if you're a nun or a monk, except the mirror of your own mind. And on the 6th day, they called me in and said, listen, prepare to leave. You should disrobe. The next day, literally, with a taxi there waiting to take me to the airport, back to a certain death in Venice Beach, I was petrified that I was going back to prison or death or suicide. I had no ability to control myself in this context. You know why? Because it sucked. I hated this context. I hated what America stood for. I'm not sure that I even like it today. I hate the war machine. I hate the capitalistic grind. Everything on a fucking meter, always running. Who wants to adapt to this bullshit regime? It's bullshit. Anyone with an addiction knows how fucked the context is. And addicts are the saints in society. Get over it, well-adapted Buddhists. We're the ones who feel. We're not just empaths. We actually feel the context of what it means to belong to a carnivorous, homicidal fucking economy where deception, lies, racism, and bullshit rule the fucking roost from the White House to the spiritual scenes to the Buddhist centers. Hierarchy is fucked. And they're built on hypocrisy in the minions who support deception, primarily because of the cachet of cheap money and applause and best-selling books written by ghostwriters, and they themselves know it. They're fucking frauds who don't come out and basically say, hey, I hear you, brother. We're in the same chorus. I hear you. You're not pointing fingers. You're basically saying, I'm going to lead by example. We're all fucking frauds. We're all based on deception. Who isn't among us flawed? Hello, I was once enlightened. I was so cool. I had 150 people out at Yucca Valley listening to me talk about in-breath, out-breath, comes and goes. I'm not making fun of it. I'm just basically saying what a fool I was, thinking that I actually had a hold on truth and even integrity and even self-trust. Today, my guru is radical vulnerability. Under no circumstance, hold your finger up and do after me. The fingerprint teaches me that Vipassana and mindfulness in Buddhism, no two of us will do it alike. There are no two fingerprints the same. 3/4 of the way through. The next day, on day 7, the government sent someone and said, this gentleman can have a 3-month extension. The Red Sea parted. They say I was the first American in modern times to live for an extended time in a monastery in Burma. I happened to be a student of Mahasi Sayadaw. I ordained under his tutelage, and he was my teacher, based upon Noah's father's good wisdom to bring forth a teaching that was so obscure at that time. Imagine agenting a teacher with 15 students. Think of it. In a transcription of one talk. That's digging deep into the well of integrity. These teachings come from a very deep, profound place. The last quarter. I stayed for 3 months, 6 months, thrown out of the country 4 times in the course of 5 years. Eventually I gave it up. But Mahasi said, I think it's worth noting in this last 1/8 of the talk before we open it up, Mahasi said I wasn't just an ordinary Buddhist mindfulness meditation teacher. Many of you know, and please allow me to say to those who don't know, I find it very interesting to trace pedagogically the teachings of the Buddha. Just to reinforce that I'm not just ranting and being irreverent to hierarchy and those who've highly trained and have been legitimized by Eastern teachers to teach in the West. But the Buddha's teaching comes to us primarily 2,600 years or so ago from someone who is said to have lived in northern India. But the truth of it is, there's no written books at all. There's not even written things on marble. There's nothing to show the evidence of Gautama, except that we have today perhaps 700 million ardent Buddhists. He probably has the gene of a Zuckerberg from Facebook, or Bill Gates. There was an entrepreneur somewhere along the way that morphed and branded this teaching. Because when you trace it back, the Buddha was said to have lived in a written text from about 1500 years after the Buddha was said to have lived, where the teachings were brought forth orally. And they convened a group of monks, primarily 500 monks, in which the Buddha's cousin Ananda, you probably know this, because he had this tremendous capacity to have traveled with the Buddha predominantly as the most intimate student of the Buddha, and had this incredible capacity to almost understand and hear things verbatim and to recall it, they brought in Ananda 3 months after the Buddha died and said, because you were with the Buddha the most, and you have such a great memory, we'd like you to tell us what the Buddha taught. And so if you look at the traditional Buddhist texts, maybe you have some here, it all starts with, thus have I heard. Well, I was at a tavern the other day in Santa Monica, and I heard someone next to me having a beer, and I'm recalling this 1,600 years later. Okay, bear with me. This is the teachings of the Buddha in the West. Now, by the way, there's a lot of hierarchy. There is a Vatican of Theravada Western mindfulness teachings. And if you cross the ranks, believe me, you could be excommunicated. Or you could be validated. Or you can make a lot of money based upon our validation, or lose all your money based upon our invalidation. There is a gatekeeper. And historically, though, hello. So 300 years after the Buddha perished, they had another council. Still, it was only word of mouth. I remember going to school. I told this gentleman, this is the teachings of the Buddha. The first noble truth is suffering. He tells this lady, and silently in the ear goes around to 25, 30 people, and it comes back to this gentleman, and the Buddha's first noble truth was that suffering sucks and better to have greed as your raison d'etre. So this becomes the living teaching of the Buddha based upon what children do to see the fallacy of the brain and auditory vibrations and sharing information that's factual. Imagine doing that for 1,500, 1,600 years. There's no way that we know what those teachings were. And the way to circumvent that was, if you look to your own mind and practice the teachings, only then will you know. But that's written in a book. So who's to validate what the real transformational wisdom is inside the psyche and the source based upon something that we don't even know existed, other than someone's interpretation subjectively validated by an external source of what the truth is as an insight in this tradition? What is true wisdom? Becomes a very operative question if you're going to look at this stuff. I'm not a scholar, but I'm decent when it comes to language and study, especially having trained in the epicenter of the Buddhist tradition that claims this tradition. Now, jump all the way to modern times. There's been 6 great Buddhist councils since the time of the Buddha. There was a third that was said to have been in Sri Lanka, a fourth, maybe the third or the fourth, 700, 800, 900 years later, where it was inscribed in palm script, a few words. We had King Ashoka up in northern India, where you can see a couple of words attributed to the Buddha. We look historically how Buddhism spread throughout South Asia by a man named Ashoka. Ashoka means I'm without sorrow, king without sorrow. If you look at Indian history, he killed upwards of 20 million people, was imprisoned, bought himself out of prison with taking the religion on of the day, brought his children involved in, and spread it throughout all of South Asia. When you look at the history of the spread, it went from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia, Myanmar, Burma, all these countries, all based on a Hitler. a little dubious on a certain level. Very interesting to look at that. And all of a sudden we have a fifth council that happened in Mandalay in the 1800s. There, if you go outside of the city of Mandalay in northern Myanmar, you'll see 363 6-foot-high marble slabs carved front and back with what the Buddha taught. It was the first time in history that it had been rendered in deep, embedded rock. Yes, you had had some Sanskrit teachings that went to Tibet that were on paper, but those were late in the game, just several hundred years ago, maybe even later than that. When was the Gutenberg press? It was all transmitted. And so those marble slabs are the teachings of the Buddha that we have today, other than in 1954, Prime Minister U Nu, who brought Mahasi Sayadaw, my preceptor and teacher, to Rangoon, he called forth the Sixth Great Buddhist Council. And who did he invite? And who did the Sangha, or the teachings of the nuns and monks, bring to that council? As the most learned monks embodying the teachings. Hear me out. Mahasi Sayadaw was considered the most theoretically astute of the teachings and the most learned when it came to direct experience and practice. He was brought in as the chief questioner, and every one of these 6 councils has 2 primary people. Someone who asks the most salient questions and someone who answers them, and the rest of the Sangha listens and agrees or disagrees on, is that the truth? So at the end of the 6th Buddhist Council, 3 years in which Mahasi Sayadaw is asking questions of a man named Tipitaka Darja, whom I met, who had memorized all 11,000 pages of the traditional Buddhist canon. And Mahasi and him sat before 3,000 monks and nuns in Rangoon, and you can see the cave in the city of Rangoon, where they dialogued on what is mindfulness, what is vipassana, what is cause and effect, what is true wisdom, what is enlightenment, what is liberation, what is insight, what is deception, what is generosity, what is moral intelligence, what is mindful intelligence, what is hypocrisy. They studied the Dharma by asking this, and they agreed at the end, these are the teachings, these aren't. And we have the first written 11,000 pages in history of these Buddhist teachings. Go to Amazon tonight when you go back and look at what the Buddha really taught, and you'll see probably close to 300,000 books where there is no chance that anyone ever knew or met this man in history. And you ask yourself, are you an intelligent human being for following the Buddha's teaching? What in the fuck teaching are you following? I mean, really. Now, pause right there, coming to the very end before we open it up. A couple of really salient teachings within these written texts that blow me away. One of which you've heard a million times, no doubt, called the Kalama Sutta, in which the Buddha was said to have been a young person at this time, and the Kalamas was a small village, a little bit like Venice Beach or Venice and Santa Monica or any of these enclaves. And everyone under the sun was coming through the Kalama village teaching the Dharma, which is not a Buddhist word, but it's a Sanskrit word in northern India. And the Kalamas were utterly confused on who to believe. And so they asked this young particular monk, I think he might have been 40 years old at the time, who do we believe? And the Buddha started by saying, you have every fucking right to doubt. It is a doubtful, confusing situation. Now, mind you, this is a paraphrase, but I think it's worthy to paraphrase. He goes on to say, because someone has written a best-selling book on Amazon doesn't mean diddly squat. He makes this point, because it's respected in religious texts and followed by many as the gospel of truth means nothing. I mean, really let that in. Really let it in. I mean, I think there's something really freeing to free ourselves and really stand naked in the authenticity of mystery, vulnerability, and the organic acquisition of truth on a little bit of a time that's humble enough to know that what you judge, you could do. That if we're not in this together, we're in this against each other. It's against the stream of deception, not against you as a person. That's called apartheid. We saw what happened in South Africa. We've seen what's happening in our country. The politics of division are alive and well in Buddhism, in Christianity, in spiritualism, in yoga. Don't believe anything that comes to you based upon the poetry and the romance, the eloquence of a teacher who tells really incredible stories. Means nothing. Let it in. Alan, let it in. Let it in. Free yourself tonight. Let yourself be freed in the gospel of the truth of your own mystery. Come back to your autonomy in intimate openness with your Sangha that extends beyond your Sangha. We are alive in this ecosystem of life at the precipice of what many are calling out as near-term extinction. Our young Swede nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Greta, don't let any meeting go quiet without telling everyone the house is on fire. My daughter's not going to school next year at 13. Dad, why? We're adults today. In-breath, out-breath. How many people I know are yearning for the next retreat? In-breath, out-breath. I hear among the youth, you watched your breath for 3 decades. There may not be any oxygen next decade. It's a different paradigm today. Immediacy, authenticity, openness. We're in an existentially critical moment, way beyond our ism. To the final points. Because it's followed by many, don't believe it. Because it's me, don't believe me. That's really rad, man. I think that's so cool. How many Buddhist teachers, Catholic teachers, New Age teachers, yoga teachers, under no circumstance do a Monty Python? Think for yourselves, don't follow me. Rare enough? I want to share with you the vulnerabilities of my own path. I've failed my integrities, and at the same time I've had a few triumphs. They've been so hard-earned. And you know where they've come from? By good soul brothers and good soul sisters who stood by me when I didn't know myself. The power of community, the power of Sangha, the power of solidarity with values over the belief in you because you're my friend. Freedom is more important than I have to stand by you. Let us be more honest than complicity. How do we enable? How do we collude? Let's look at these particular states of consciousness. And the Buddha concluded by saying, who to believe? Only when you see in your own mind that which frees you from fear, frees you from lobha or greed, frees you from moha or delusion. And only you see that over repeated weeks and months and years. And you know from your own direct experience, I'm being very emphatic because I want to take this teaching in for me, not you. I am speaking to me. I hope you know that. I have no need. I have no students. I am not a teacher. I want no part of that world anymore. All I want to do is be authentic and real and play at the edge of openness with new people in my life and old people and do the best that I can. But only when you see after a long period of time that actually that fear and greed and hypocrisy and deception and ignorance recedes, then and only then believe it and only know it because of what you did within your own mind to see it recede. Know the Dhamma, know that teaching to be true. Didn't put an ISM on it. Didn't put a Buddhism on it. Didn't put, I got validated by my teacher in South Asia back in 1910. Wow. Buddhism doesn't exist except as an illusion, a hoax, a completely agreed upon hallucination, get over it. Come out of that dream. Wow, it's a state of consciousness. There is no hierarchy in this situation. No one's got a hold on the road to freedom. Only when you see in yourself, this leads to love. This leads to generosity. This leads to genuine caring, not occasional caring. Goes the extra mile, the extra month, the extra year with you. I stand with you. Push me away. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm holding you within the solidarity of this Dhamma teaching. I'm not going to excommunicate you. You are a salvation for our Sangha. You are our son. You are our daughter. Where is that? How could that be true that you did that, except other than not walking the Dhamma? They need help. We need help. We need to support each other. Only when you see it over a long period of time, believe it. And I ask you as we close, are you looking mindfully and carefully at how you tread inside of your own consciousness and how it interrelates in the complexities of your context? Are you taking good mindful note of how you're walking that eightfold path in your own heart and mind and absorbing it like oxygen every day? My teacher before he died, who inherited the tradition from Mahasi, Sera U Pandita, I spent 9 nights with him before he died. He said, Alan, the Dhamma, meditation, mindfulness, meditation, Dhamma, is like breathing. It must be done by you. It must be done all the time, and no one can do it for you. Do you practice meditation, Alan, as you do breathing? You don't hold up your breath today to hold enough air for tomorrow. You don't need to be in a particular sitting posture in order to breathe, do you? He was joking with me. He knew I wanted to be in retreat again. And he was basically saying, no. Be alive today. Don't teach Buddhism. Support people in how to oxygenate beautiful states of consciousness. And I leave you with that. Mahasi Sayadaw, he was very emphatic. Sera U Pandita, the monks and nuns in this tradition were very emphatic. Do not follow me. Do not believe me. Know these teachings in yourself as you would your own body, your own mind, your own oxygen. Breathe life into transformational wisdom. U Pandita told me very explicitly, do not teach Buddhism. I think that's really telling by the tradition heads. Nor did they ever validate, sanction anyone in the tradition ever to teach, including me. And I don't teach. I make it very clear that we're in this together. Very, 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 very clear. And I won't bore you with my own inner tattoos and sacred struggles about the struggles that I've had. We've all been in those particular fields. But I really want to share with you tonight that essence, that we're in this together. And I'm here for the end of September. I'm doing a group every Thursday night here based upon you and the blessedness of Against the Stream and Noah. And I want to do all that I can in this process to communicate the evidence of my journey and to do all I can to see and support in you and in me, which is sort of my raison d'etre, that meditation in the tradition that I come from is all postures, all times, all context, and all states. If I leave anything as we open up to discussion, please support that place in you, disavowing postural apartheid. It is not found in retreat. That's an aberration, a commerciality of these teachings from the West, from the East. It's an embodied presence. Yoga is not off the mat. There is yoga that goes to the mat. It's not meditation off the cushion. There is meditation that goes to the cushion. You bring your meditation to a retreat. You don't take the retreat into the world. It's a complete opposite. And therein lies where post-monasticism for me has been pretty much a 30-year adventure tragedy of seeing how these teachings, as I see them in my own being, apply and interrelate to different degrees of complexity. Thus, it's led me on the journey to primarily areas where there are people who are marginalized and voiceless, people who've been in refugee camps, displaced people, and sadly, from an outsider's point of view, the witnessing to genocide and war. What does it look like for a refugee, a woman who's been gang raped? What is her Dharma? What did she encounter? And I'll tell you, one thing I've learned is to go quiet and really learn the high art of listening. So I leave it to you. I'm here to listen to you and to not give you answers to anything, but to come to some higher evolution together. Should you want to know more about me or share anything about you or ask anything whatsoever, I consider no question taboo, nothing, zero. And you can press me on that. I know I'm in good company for that. So thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for listening.
That has been Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening. You can find the entire list of my podcasts at alanclements.com, along with my books and upcoming events and live broadcasts. In addition, you can also book a private session with me if you wish by phone or Skype on the website. If you're a regular listener or simply feel moved to support my work, you can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation, a tax-deductible one, in any amount you feel comfortable, either on the support page of alanclements.com or a monthly pledge through my Patreon site at patreon.com/Alan Clements. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and thank you for sharing word of it among your friends and on social media. Thank you from my heart. Until the next time, blaze on with fearless love.